Hey, how are you? Welcome back. Here I am, down in my little box. It's small, but it's comfortable. Happy to have you back. This is the last presentation in this part of the course, and we're going to take a quick look at the paradox of collective action, which is sort of an extension of cost-benefit self-interest logic. And first of all, let's address the word paradox. A paradox is a seeming contradiction. It's two ideas that don't really seem to go together, but they actually do. And paradoxes sometimes can be a little bit hard to understand because they seem to be saying the opposite thing. But hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand this particular paradox. It's really quite fascinating, actually. These are ideas that come from a guy named Mancur Olson. It doesn't look like it's spelled that way, but it is. Mancur Olson. He was a political economist who wrote one of my favorite books in political science, which is called The Logic of Collective Action. And it's not necessarily one of my favorite books because it's absolutely right. It's one of my favorite books because it's an extremely straightforward critique, really, of what it is that Madison says about self-interest. So in Olson's words, he says, and this should sound kind of familiar to you as a Madisonian type idea, it has often been taken for granted that if everyone in a group of individuals had some interest in common, then there would be a tendency for the group to seek to further this interest. Sounds kind of like Madison, right? That if there's self-interest, there's going to be faction. Thus, many students of politics in the United States for a long time supposed that citizens with a common political interest would organize and lobby to serve that interest. In other words, self-interest is going to cause faction. That's the conventional wisdom in political science up into the 1970s. When Olson is writing this book and saying, hey, we need to take another look at this idea because it may well be that people will not participate in collective action out of their own self-interest. They'll choose not to vote out of self-interest. They will choose not to join groups out of self-interest. And that could be a real problem. Now, how does Olson get to this paradoxical idea that it is in a person's self-interest to not participate? How does he get there? So in order to understand that, we're going to have to understand the distinction between private goods and public goods. Private goods are described as things that are, number one, excludable. So excludable means if I pay the cost, I get the benefit. I can exclude you from that benefit. So I buy my car, I get the benefit of my car. I buy my house, I get the benefit of my house. I buy my pizza, I get the benefit of my pizza. These are typical kinds of things that we deal with on a daily basis. The other issue here is the issue of divisibility, or what economists call rival. What that means is that if I get something like a car, then that car is taken off the market. Nobody else can buy that car. So we're in competition where we are rivals for this thing. Public goods are different in that, number one, once they're produced, there is not an easy way to exclude people from taking the benefits of that collective good, that public good. And there is this idea that you can't really split up, you can't divide these public goods. So let's take, for instance, roads. We all use roads. Some of us pay more in taxes, gas taxes, and state income taxes, and federal taxes for building and keeping up those roads. Other people pay less or even nothing. But once that road is laid down, unless it's a toll road, that road is available to anyone to use. So if Canadian tourists come to California, they can rent a car and drive on our roads, even though they haven't contributed a single penny to creating those roads and keeping those roads up. A lot of what government does is provide for these kinds of public goods. They are things that a person can use no matter whether they have actually invested in creating that public good. One of my favorite examples is National Public Radio. I'm a huge fan of National Public Radio. I listen to it every day, twice a day. The thing about radio or television is that once the broadcaster has put it out there onto the airwaves, there's no way to stop anyone from getting the benefit. So National Public Radio, say our local station here, KCLU, they put their content out onto the airwaves, out onto the internet. And if you have a radio or you have a computer, you can take advantage of that. And you don't have to pay for it. You see, this whole thing is driven by membership. People who are members pay the money, but they don't get more of the benefit than somebody who doesn't pay the costs at all. So here's the problem with this. Individuals who have an interest in a collective outcome, could be an election, could be building roads, could be national defense. Individuals who have an interest in that outcome will choose not to participate in producing that public good because they're going to get the benefits whether they participate or not. So think about an election. An election is a collective good. Everybody goes out and votes, and everybody lives with the results of that vote. Keep in mind that public goods can also be bad. Public good doesn't mean that it's something that we all enjoy. So in 2016, everybody went out and voted. We had an election. Donald Trump wins. That's a public good. We all get the benefit of that democracy. Whether we like it or not is another question. So if we're going to get the benefit, where is the value in bearing the cost? And Olson says that rational individuals will choose not to participate. So participating in the creation of a public good is not rational, is non-rational. It's not irrational, it's non-rational. That is, if you're going to get the benefits anyway, then why not be a free rider? Let everyone else do all of the work, and then you can get the benefit. That's a really interesting idea, that it could be that it's in the self-interest of individuals to not participate, knowing that they're going to get the benefits one way or another. So this would seem to suggest that no one is going to vote. I mean, why would you? You're going to bear all the costs of engaging in that act, and then you're going to get the benefit just as much as the person who didn't vote. Why would you do that? It's non-rational, according to Olson. But clearly, people vote. I mean, this year, probably around 100 million people will cast votes in the presidential election. If you're if you're Olson, you need to be able to explain that. Why is that happening? So let's talk about ways that we resolve this paradox. Resolving the paradox is about selective incentives. Selective incentives are like a private good. There's something that we get for doing something that is otherwise non-rational. So there are three different flavors here of selective incentives. One is negative selective incentives, what ordinary people call punishments. Negative selective incentive is a punishment for not doing something that serves some common purpose. So let's take, for example, taxes. Most people pay their taxes. The United States of America has one of the highest rates of tax compliance in the entire world, and it's all because we're scared shitless of the IRS. We're scared that if we don't pay our taxes, there will be a negative selective incentive. There will be a punishment, and that punishment is maybe a fine, or maybe you go to jail. And that fine or that jail sentence, that is your private good. Now, you may not like it. Remember, private good or any good doesn't have to be good or bad. We're not talking about that. What we're talking about is who's bearing the cost here. Well, you are going to bear the cost of non-participation in taxes. Now, KCLU, National Public Radio, can't really sanction us the same way that government can sanction us for not participating in some way. So another strategy is positive selective incentives, what people call rewards. I give money to 3 different public radio stations, my family does, and when we do that, we get positive selective incentives. As members, we get a t-shirt. In fact, I happen to be wearing one of my public radio t-shirts right now. This is a selective incentive. I get this because I'm helping to bear the costs of funding America's greatest music station, KEXP.org in Seattle. I get this selective incentive because I'm helping to pay the bills. You don't get it because you haven't given to that station, even though you can freely go online, and I hope you will, KEXP.org, and listen to some really great music. So positive selective incentives or rewards are ways that groups can get people to support them, even though what they're producing is available to everyone. Finally, psychological selective incentives. This is, what you might call the warm fuzzy. Because you've participated, you're getting some psychological reward from that participation. And, when it comes to elections, given that they're a public good, given that there is no rational reason to participate in elections, we have to understand why it is that people actually will vote. What Olson is arguing is that the reason that people vote is not out of self-interest, but it is out of a sense of duty or obligation. Rationally, it doesn't make sense to vote because you're going to get the benefit anyway. Your single vote is not going to change the outcome. It's not going to decide whether Donald Trump wins or Joe Biden wins. However, you vote out of a sense of duty or obligation because you've been socialized to believe that this is something that's important to do as an individual in a democracy. And so what you're really getting is a psychological incentive to engage. I mean, we don't punish people for not voting, although there are perfectly good democracies out there, like Australia, who do have compulsory voting, but we don't. So there's no negative selective incentive, and there are no positive selective incentives other than maybe an I voted sticker or something like that. We've largely outlawed things like giving people a free cup of coffee for going out to do their civic duty. That's illegal. So really there are only psychological incentives left to get people to engage in elections. But here's the problem. If people are voting out of a sense of duty or obligation because it's a symbolic thing rather than something that they're doing out of self-interest, what is the quality of the vote going to be? Because, somebody shows up, they don't really know who's who, they go through their ballot, casting votes hither and yon for whatever because they want to be engaged in the act of voting. But what is the value of that vote? Especially relative to a vote that's informed. I mean, you could sit down and figure out who all the candidates are and what they stand for and who you are going to support or not support. You could read through those ballot propositions and all of that, but that's going to come at a cost. And that's called an information cost. The cost of casting an informed vote is very high. So this kind of suggests that people, when they go to cast a vote, are not going to have a lot of information. And that sort of brings into question whether elections really reflect people's self-interest or if they simply reflect the symbols that are gathered together in the act of voting. It's kind of a downer. This point in the class is always kind of a downer because it seems to be that that we beat up Madison's conception of self-interest so badly that it's hard to imagine how elections can have any meaning. We're going to come back around and hopefully find that there is some meaning and some expression of self-interest in elections. But for right now, I'm going to leave you on this downer and let you know that the sun will be coming out tomorrow. All right? So hopefully you understand better now the paradox of collective action.